Greetings, disciples, friends, and wayward souls, and welcome to another Planet Zoo tutorial. Now this time we're going to talk about what we've been leading up to with the other tutorials thus far, and that is, drumroll please, breeding. I know we've already talked about that, but this time specifically we're going to be talking about how to get perfect animals. Animals that have a 100 in every single stat. Alright, before we begin talking about how to breed perfect animals, we need to make sure that you have an understanding about how to breed better animals. Now you can check out the link to check out the last video that I made, which is on specifically that, because if you're not familiar with that process, then this is going to be very difficult for you to understand. Now this will be the very end game. It's more of a struggle getting them up to 100 in all stats than it is getting them up to 100 in the first two, but again, it's part of that process, so make sure you watch that video first before you watch this one. Alright, so first things first. We need to talk about how exactly to set up your exhibits for breeding perfect animals. Now keep in mind that different animals have two different breeding strategies that they adhere to, and that is type A, which would be 1v1 as I call them, and type B, which is 1vx, so one male versus many females. So type A animals are going to consist of animals like red pandas, for instance, that have one dominant male and one dominant female per habitat. Now for these guys, I recommend breeding with 4 habitats, each of them having a breeding pair, and then usually it's a good idea to have a 5th habitat to put the offspring that you do not want to keep in. Now on the flip side, for type B animals, such as elephants that have one adult male that is dominant and as many adult females as are allowed in the Zoopedia, which we talked about in the previous video, these guys I would suggest having 2 main habitats and a 3rd habitat to put the offspring that you do not want in. This is especially important with these guys because you don't actually have to keep these happy. You'll get protesters, but in my case they seem to have glitched onto the staff area anyway. Now if you're particularly focused on one animal of this particular type, you're welcome to also have up to maybe 3 of these, but if you have 4 habitats that are all completely full with these animals and all of them are breeding, you're probably going to have far too many. As you can see, this one right here is just overflow that I used to sell the excess. So now we're going to talk about how to breed specifically the 1v1 or type A animals as I call them. Now it's going to be very similar to how we were breeding better animals in the previous video, except when you get to a certain point, which is of course when your size and longevity are at 100. Now these animals I call 200x, because they have 200 in these first 2 stats and they can have anything in these second 2 stats. It doesn't really matter except with a very limited number of species that need a high enough fertility to breed, like the pandas we have in the other exhibits. Now what you do once you've gotten these animals up to 100 is you keep them cranking out offspring. And once you have several of these offspring, you're going to take them and put them into the trade center over time, and eventually you'll end up with a few of that kind of animal in your trade center. So all of these in here have 100 in their stats, and then all you're going to do is you're going to compare mates every time one of them ages up. So as you can see, this guy's 1.1 years old. He'll be aged up pretty soon. Let's go ahead and wait for that. Why not? Alright, now Bao here has just matured. And as you can see, I find that it's good to have naming conventions for these animals, but it doesn't have to be anything too intense. So for animals that are 200x animals, I just put a star in front of their name. That way I know that they are better than the normal animals, but they are not as good as the perfect animals, which I put 2 stars in front of their name. And what you're going to do as soon as they age up is just compare mates with the other animals. You usually have to close their menu and open it back up if they just aged up. And you just check to see if there are any overlaps where every single one of these has a chance to get a 100. Now in this case there's not one, but I'll show you what we're looking for. Alright, now here's an example from the previous video actually of animals that are a great match for each other. Now the way you can tell this is you just look at their stats, and as long as they have a chance of getting a 100 on all 4 stats, then they are a good match. Now, an amazing match is any animal that has a 25% or less amount of coverage on both of those last 2 stats. So if they started at 75% and went all the way to 100, then they are an excellent match because their offspring actually have a 1 in 4 chance of being perfect, which is excellent. Again, I don't know how many times I can say excellent, I mean it. So now we are going to talk about type B animals. Now type B animals again have one dominant male and as many females as that species allows. And the way you're going to do these is differently. You don't want to just put one of each, a male and a female in each habitat, because that's a waste of habitat space, it's a waste of staff resources. But what you want to do, and this is actually a lot easier than breeding the other type A animals, is that you want to basically get one really good male off the market and then buy as many really good females as you can get, and this is important, from different zoos, because you want as much genetic variation as you can. Now, once you've gotten all these females in here, basically what you're going to do is you're going to keep breeding them, and whenever they have a male offspring, if that male offspring is better than the male you have here, then compare mates after he's grown up, check all the females, see if you have any matches, like we talked about earlier, and if you do, then you are in luck, and that is your new male. Now, otherwise, if you're still breeding them up, that again pertains to the previous video, but with the females, what you're going to do, and this actually also applies to type A animals, is once they've reached a certain age, I usually aim for about half of their lifespan, just replace them with their female offspring. Because again, inbreeding is not going to matter because of how we're doing this breeding program. Now, I do have one important note on this as well, and that is that if you're buying your females off the market and you've already made sure that they all came from different zoos, only replace them with their own female offspring. This ensures that the genetic variation that you paid a hefty price to get in the beginning is going to pay off and continue throughout many, many generations. If you don't do this, then you're wasting all that CC that you spent, because you're not going to be able to get perfect animals as easily. Now we're going to go into some general tips about how to get perfect animals, and a few that are going to really help you once you've really nailed down the strategy, but that might not be so helpful in the beginning. Now one of these, for instance, is that you can actually make a breeding factory if you manage to get one particular scenario down, and that is that you have two habitats like we have here for specifically type B animals. This is going to be much more difficult for type A animals, but it could potentially still work. And basically you're going to have one of these that's set up specifically in order to breed animals that can mate with a single male offspring that is a match for all of those animals. And this actually is what happened to me during the beta, and why I was able to breed as many lions as I was, is because I had one habitat with one male and all the females in that habitat, and each of them were producing with a pretty reasonable percentage of success a match. At least a 50% match for the male that was in this second habitat. Now this really isn't too hard to set up, because once you've found a match, a singular match, what you want to do is you want to keep the male who is matched, and then the female and the male in this side that ended up making that match, you just want to keep breeding and pumping out more matches. Now again, you need to have a match to begin with, so it's a little more complicated, and it actually does take getting to the point where you're making perfect animals, but it also allows you to crank them out with much more success, usually, than with these other methods that are going to be a lot slower, but get you to that point. Now, one tip that's going to help you out tremendously is that you can always check the Animal Trade Center for matches for your animals. And this only applies to animals that are popular or easy to breed most of the time, as most other animals like elephants or pandas, you're not going to see a whole lot of animals with a 200x configuration. But what you can do is just go in here, hit compare mates, and check out one of your animals and see if they are a match. Just go through your whole list on that other gender's side, and if they're a match, you buy them, you go ahead and mix them with those offspring. Now if you find an animal that is what I would call a near match, meaning that they're very close to being able to get a 100 in all their stats but aren't quite there, what you can do is just buy this animal off the market, and then go ahead and breed it with one or two of your other animals, especially if it's a male, because you can just put it right back in the trade center when you're done and wait for that new animal to pop out, and then check and see if it does have a better chance of mating. Now generally this is going to change both the immunity and fertility, so do keep that in mind, that it might lower your chances in one and raise your chances of getting 100 in the other. So one last thing I want to talk about is that very particular animals, specifically things like giant pandas, which is the example used in the last video, are harder to breed. And this does mean that you have to have a higher welfare stat to actually try to conceive, but it also means that at least one of them has to have a decent fertility stat. So for instance, I have a male, and this is a type B habitat, so you can have as many females as you want up to a certain number. He has a 100 in fertility, and there's another mate here that has a 17 in fertility, and as you can see, they have a 47% chance of conception still. So it's not a crazy major thing, but this can get down below even 5%, which just is insane, and it's really, really rare you're going to be able to actually get them to breed properly if that is the case. So the video is not over yet, and I have one last surprise for you guys before I go. Leucistic animals. Now, we're going to talk about exactly how to breed these guys, but first off, you need to know how to get your first one, and really there's no definitive way to tell you how to do this. But all I can say is that it's very, very, very similar to the way that we've been breeding perfect animals, because the emphasis in breeding perfect animals is that you have several different types of genetic variation, and that none of your animals are breeding between habitats, which is that they're all inbreeding within their own habitat. And that's important with these guys too, because that promotes genetic variation, and that helps ensure that eventually you're going to find two animals that have the trait you need for them to breed together and get a leucistic animal. Now again, this is random, so there's no telling whether or not you're actually going to get leucistic animal, but this is honestly the best way to try to get one, and it's random luck. You can also find them on the market, so you might want to keep your eyes peeled for those, but they go very quickly, even for max price. Now once you've gotten your first leucistic animal, which again is up to random chance, all you need to do is breed that animal with two other animals of the same species, and then each of those offspring will be half leucistic, meaning that 50% of their genes attributed to that trait are leucistic. So all you need to do from there is breed those two animals together, these two half leucistic animals, and then their offspring will have a 25% chance of being 1-to-1 leucistic, like all of these guys in here. Now, this is really not too difficult, and once you've actually gotten your second leucistic animal, you can actually just breed it with the first one. That's really all you need to do, and they have a 100% chance of producing the perfectly 1-to-1 leucistic animals every single time. So, once you've got two, you can crank out as many as you want, but this is really just to teach you how to get those first two. Sadly, this video had to come to a close at some point, but that does not mean that we are done with Planet Zoo quite yet. Next video is going to be a zoo layout tutorial. We're going to look at some of my zoos and some new ideas that I haven't shown you guys quite yet, so stay tuned for that and subscribe if you do not want to miss a second. Now also, we're going to have a bunch of Life is Strange 2 videos coming out very soon, leading up to the launch of episode 5 here in December, so go ahead and check that out if you think it's something you'd enjoy. Post your questions, video suggestions, and critique in the comments, like the video if you liked the video, share it with your friends if you think they'd like it too, and as always, thanks for watching. You all have been great, and I've been Hipster Jesus. Out.